Hey everybody, welcome back to Pat's Mythos. My name is Pat. I'm here today with a monthly wrap-up video looking at everything I read in May of 2023 and talking about what I plan to read in June of 2023. So just to keep an update on our yearly book counter, I am now up to 21 books for the year of 2023. And in the month of May, I read 4 books. I don't think I had any 2 books get the same rating, which I'll get into here in a moment. So things were a little all over the map, and it didn't help that Zelda Tears of the Kingdom came out for Nintendo Switch in May, and that honestly took up quite a bit of my time. There was a solid part of, when that first game first came out where I really just did not want to read or do anything related to books. I just wanted to play that game. So I'm still happy I made it out with 4 books total, because it could have been less. I kind of had to push through to get there, and I met my TBR goal that I'd set in last month's video. Overall, I'm happy with it, and my Zelda playing has leveled out. I'm hoping it won't impact my June reading too much. The first book that I read in the month of May was The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle. This is a Lovecraftian horror novella that is really short. I think it's, between 1 and 150 pages. It's really not long at all. You could probably breeze through it in a day or two if you wanted to. And this is really cool to me because it is Victor LaValle's take on the Lovecraft's original story, The Horror at Red Hook, but instead it's told through the eyes of a black man from Harlem. If you know anything about Lovecraft, there's a decent chance you'll know that some of his stances and views were horribly racist and xenophobic, to say the least. And so to see one of his stories kind of flipped on its head, being told from the perspective of a black man in Black Tom in this novella, was really fascinating in that it was able to look at some, more social commentary, looking back at the time of Lovecraft, while also really doing a good job of nailing the Lovecraft horror. I just had a great time with this. It has that weirdness. It has the spooky, cosmic monster horror that you love when you read anything related to Lovecraft. And yeah, I think I want to check out more of Victor LaValle in the future. I don't know if he's made anything else inspired by Lovecraft, but this was a major hit for me, and I actually gave it 5 stars. And I rarely ever give a novella 5 stars, but this one really knocked it out of the park. I highly recommend checking it out. And the next book that I read in the month of May was The Last Light of the Sun by Guy Gavriel Kay. So even though this book wasn't quite on the level as some of the other Guy Gavriel Kay books that I've read, Tagana and Lines of Al Rassan, even on his worst day, Guy Gavriel Kay still writes a really great historical fantasy standalone. So as you might know about Guy Gavriel Kay and all of his historical fantasy books, he typically pulls from some part of history or some culture to kind of be the stand-in in his fantasy world. And for this one, he kind of has his stand-ins for Vikings, Anglo-Saxons, and the Welsh, the more Celtic feeling culture there. And overall, I did like his representations of these, even though these type of cultures are relatively common in fantasy and have left their mark on kind of, the old Tolkien-esque kind of start of fantasy. It's not something that really ever gets that old to me, as long as it's done well. I thought The Way of Edan was done well. I thought that The Last Light of the Sun is done well. I feel like those cultures, they can always bring out an awesome fantasy tale if they're done right. So 4 stars from me. I would still say if you are a Guy Gavriel Kay fan, you're making your way through his backlog, don't skip this one. It's still worth the read just to get the complete experience. But I also would say maybe don't make it your first Guy Gavriel Kay book, because I would hate that if you had not as great an experience with this one, that you wouldn't want to continue with his work. I would definitely say read Tagana or Lines of Al Rassan first and come back to this later and see what you think. I think overall it's solid, and even if it's not his best work, I still really enjoyed it. The next book in my May 2023 wrap-up is The Fall of Babel by Josiah Bancroft, which I listened to on audio, completing my listen through of the Books of Babel. I gave this book 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was okay. It was decent. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't great. It falls somewhere in between there, between those 2 parameters. And overall, I really did enjoy the series of Books of Babel. I can't go too far into any spoilers or anything about the 4th book in a series, but even though the book was far from perfect, it wasn't awful, and the series as a whole was good. I actually did a video, which I can link up here, that will give you my full spoiler-free thoughts on the entire series. I recommend you checking that out if you're on the fence about starting it. But overall, my journey with Thomas Sendlin and the Books of Babel is over, and I enjoyed my time with it, and I hope that if you give it a try, you will too. And last but not least, the last book that I finished in the month of May of 2023 was The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. If you're not familiar with this book, it's about a American family that's a Southern Baptist missionary family from Georgia in the US. They make a trip to the Congo as a missionary trip, to spread Christianity to the native Congolese. And it just so happens that when they go is also the time of like major political upheaval and a revolution starting in the Congo. And overall, it is a bit of a slow burn. It really takes its time chronicling, the culture clashing and the disparity between these Americans who come to, spread their religion and the way the Congolese live, and dives a little bit into, the geopolitics and the kind of bigger things at play in the Congo Revolution at that time. And overall, felt like a really awesome history lesson as well as a pretty decent character study looking at the daughters of this missionary family. They are the POV characters for the most part. And yeah, it's a really interesting book and a really awesome historical fiction experience. It's a subject I knew very little about, these mid 20th century post colonialism Africa and the Congo. And I'm really glad I read it. This book deserves a lot more attention. And I hope that more people that are reading historical fiction will give it a try. And so those are the 4 books that I finished in May. And I've decided in each of these wrap up videos, I always want to announce a book of the month going forward. And for this month, the book of the month is The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. If you heard me just gush about it, it's probably not too surprising, even though I technically rated The Ballad of Black Tom higher than this at 5 stars to 4.5 stars. Just looking at, this is a thicker book. There's a lot more to it than The Ballad of Black Tom that was so quick. And I think that even though I rated them slightly differently, this is the one that stuck out in my mind the most just because of how long it took me to read it and sort of the lasting impact it's had on me. So I'm going to give the book of the month for the month of May, The Poisonwood Bible. All right, now, and looking at my June 2023 TBR, I've already started 2 books right here at the end of May that are going to trickle into the month of June when I finish them. The first one I'm doing on audio, and that is The Children of Gods and Fighting Men by Shauna Lawless. So speaking of losing a lot of time to reading last month playing Zelda, well, I'm going to be losing a lot of time reading this month because I'm going on a trip to Ireland at the end of June. And so leading up to the trip, I did want to try to read something related to Ireland and learn a little bit about Irish history and the lore. And I heard great things about The Children of Gods and Fighting Men. And so I decided to fit that in here at the start of the month to help get me excited for my trip and learn a little bit about the place that I'm going to be visiting. So far, it's been fantastic. As I mentioned, I'm doing it on audio. The narration is awesome. It follows 2 female POV characters telling the story in, I believe, the 10th century Ireland, when there are these high kings of Ireland as well as Viking kings that are kind of splitting off different parts of the country or the nation. And so it kind of follows some intrigue and wars happening in between the native Irish kings and the Viking kings. And the main character, Gormla, is an incredible POV character. I'm loving her stuff so far. She is sort of, I've heard her compared to Cersei Lannister, and I can kind of see it. She is the one that's in the middle of this game amongst these different kings, trying to control it. And I'm really loving the intrigue. I'm loving the Irish lore, even though this book is historical fiction. It also is a historical fantasy in that, yes, we're dealing with real Irish history events and characters. There are some Irish mythological creatures and different groups that are a part of Ireland's lore that are kind of intermixed. So, some chapters feel very grounded in reality and the real history, and then there will be a twist where the lore comes to the forefront. And I really love this kind of combination. And yeah, I'm really enjoying it so far. And I'm looking forward to reading it here before my trip. And so while I'm listening to that, I'm also reading on my Kindle Dragon Keeper by Robin Hobb. This is the first book in the Rain Wild Chronicles Quartet, the 4th out of the 5 sub-series of the Realm of the Elderling series. And I'm actually enjoying it so far. I think I'm about 20% through. It's not that bad. I mean, I'm going to have to see how I feel after 4 books, but so far I'm cautiously optimistic that, it's really not as bad as many people make it out to be. To be honest, so far, it kind of feels quite a bit like Live Ship Traders, just based on the locations and some of the characters and stuff. While they're not from Live Ship Traders, we have some time in Bingtown and we have some time up in the Rainwild. So it feels familiar enough that I'm enjoying it so far, and I'm excited to see how I end up feeling about it towards the end. And so when I finish Dragon Keeper, I'm going to be reading Dark Sea's End by Richard Nell, and I plan to be doing this on Kindle. Dark Sea's End is I guess it's a sequel, or it's set in the same world as the Ash and Sand trilogy, which is one of my all-time favorite trilogy series, whatever you want to call it, that I've ever read in fantasy. And I read that about a year ago. The second book, Kings of Ash, is one of my all-time favorite books. So Richard Nell, since reading that, has been on my radar, and I know this book, I think, came out last year. It's very quick. I think it's just a couple hundred pages. It's a short novel set in the same world as Ash and Sand. I don't think it necessarily follows any of the same characters, but we're going to be back in that world. I'm excited to read more of Nell's writing, and yeah, this is a long time coming for me as a major fan of the Ash and Sand trilogy, checking out book one of Beyond Ash and Sand, or whatever this next series is called. And then my next audio read after I finish The Children of God and Fighting Men is Different Seasons by Stephen King. I actually haven't read any of Stephen King's novella or short story collections before, at least I don't think. So this will be my first one, and it's been on my TBR for so long. There's so many big time stories in this. You have The Shawshank Redemption, or whatever the full name is. I can't remember right now. You have The Body, which is Stand By Me in the movie. And so this is going to be really exciting for me. And also, the audio is done by Frank Muller. If you did the Dark Tower books or some of the other Stephen King books like The Green Mile, if you've done them on audio, you'll know Frank Muller is one of a kind as a narrator. So I've been saving this one for a bit now, and I'm really excited to dive in, see these 4 different stories, and I think I'm going to love them. And last but not least, this is sort of an if I have time read. Like I said, going on this trip for the last week and a half of June, I don't know if I'll have time to get to this, or maybe I'll try to read some on my trip, but I don't expect to be doing a ton of that. That is A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. So this is a psychological horror book about a family going through an exorcism of one of their child. I've heard mostly great things about this. The concept of exorcisms are really fascinating to me from both a kind of spiritual, supernatural perspective, as well as the psychological perspective that has kind of come out in the last couple of decades about how kind of insane the practice of exorcisms actually were for so many centuries across the world. So this will be a really interesting read, and I need some more horror in my life. I haven't read any horror in a little bit, so looking forward to this one if I have time. It might trickle into July, but then with a stacked July TBR, we'll see if it just kind of falls off into another month. But yep, I'll do my best to read it. And that's pretty much everything I have for today. It was really great talking about what I read in May and talking about what I'm going to be reading in June. These are some of my favorite videos to make. I love just, sharing what I've been reading and what I'm going to read. And I'd love to hear more from you down in the comments section. Let me know how your May was. Tell me what you're reading in June. Can't wait to hear about it. If you stayed here until the end of the video, I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time to watch. I really appreciate it. That's all I have. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.